Greetings, salutations, and namaste. This drop is coming to y'all during heart of Mercury retrograde. We got another month of Saturn in retrograde and another 2 months of Jupiter in retrograde. Mercury is also combust and Venus is combust. So how are you feeling? How are you feeling? I was reluctant to even do a drop, but it's almost like it's so crazy. Let's see what happens. Yeah, I had messed up my knee about a week ago, and it was confounding me as to why, because I was like looking at the major planetary transits and seeing, usually something like that will happen during a sign movement, a major planet moving signs, and I couldn't really pinpoint what was going on. There's a lot of crazy shit going on, but what was going on that day? And I was like, oh, Neptune moved. It's retrograding and it's back in Aquarius. So yeah, these exoplanets have a lot to tell us that I think in Vedic culture they don't really narrow in on those, but I'm very intrigued by them, so I'm going to try and research a bit more, and I'll let you know what I find. In the meantime, and this is kind of just the nature of this video, I'm just going to jump all over the place, cosmic cocktail hour style. I'm going to throw out some hot takes on exaltations, debilitations, whatever that means, retrogrades a little bit, and of course the combustion, which I think maybe be the most underrated of the things to look at, because when a planet is combust, what's actually happening is it's invisible. The sun is blotting it out from the horizon. So for instance, when Mercury and Venus, which travel with the sun quite a bit, and will become combust, they become invisible to our sight line. This kind of makes us feel like the planetary energy might be absentee during that period, for instance. So that can be really felt by everybody, and especially if you have combustions in your chart. So the nature of exaltation and debilitation, these terms first have to be examined and recontextualized. So debilitation, let's look at what the dictionary.com says. It basically implies that there is a weakness that has to be present for debilitation. And when you're talking about it in terms of astrology, that weakness is actually more on the terms of the astrologer than the individual himself or herself, because it becomes more unpredictable. So debilitation, let's just take an analogy of an exaltation is a superpower. So every planet gets exalted in at least one spot and debilitated in one spot. So if a planet is exalted, it's going to be debilitated in the house that is opposite the house that it gets exalted in. So the mutual aspect is what it's called, 7 houses away. And this becomes important for some stuff I'll talk about later in relationship compatibility. 7 houses away is the most important aspect in astrology, because it is the 7th house is the house of other people and relationships. So it becomes the fulcrum point of all of our karmas. And get into why Saturn actually is great in the 7th house for that reason. If an exaltation is a superpower, the debilitation is the secret superpower. And I'll give you an example through superheroes. So Peter Parker becomes Spider-Man because he gets bitten by a spider. That's a transformation. Bruce Banner becomes the Incredible Hulk because of exposure to radiation. And maybe non-superhero, but kind of very relatable, is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So there are these qualities to the individual that get brought out in the debilitation that become asymmetrical to the nature of that planet. And this is why it's a problem for astrologers, and why it's a debilitation instead of actually a superpower. And this gets into something I learned from as per Eve Mendoza, who's a great astrologer. She was talking about Gemini, who's the brilliant mind who created the Gemini system of astrology. And Jaime said, Nicha, Ucha, same thing. So Nicha is debilitation, Ucha is exaltation. You're essentially getting a bold expression of this planet, but in a way where in the exaltation it becomes more predictable, it becomes more functional to the house that it's in. Whereas the debilitation is going to bring out something that is irregular, that may be nonlinear, and may come about through struggle or transformation. And if you know anything about astrology, astrological rules are sort of based on a meritocracy of easiness. So nobody has an easy life. There's always going to be hardship in every chart. So the idea is to find the strength and, of course, the secret super strength of everyone's chart. Okay, so if an exaltation is the superpower and the debilitation is a secret superpower, it's harnessed through some out-of-the-box approach to that planet's nature or that house, the nature of the house that the planet is debilitated in. So the planet basically mirrors the individual having to behave in a manner that might seem incongruous with itself, and this is why these kind of present troublesome prospects for astrologers, and why maybe there's been a rather negative or pejorative term assigned to it. In fact, the actual term debilitation, I'm not even sure where it comes from, Nietzsche, but what I understand, Nietzsche has a lot of different meanings, just for what that's worth. And it's definitely something to consider that, well, let's start with Saturn as a great example, and it gives me kind of an opportunity to highlight why this planet, which seems to be the most scary to people, should be the most embraced, because it exerts a dynamic force on some of the houses that most people care about the most. So Saturn gets exalted in Libra, which is the natural 7th house. I was saying that mutual aspect from one planet or one house looking at another house is the most important aspect. If a planet is in a certain house, the house that it's looking at, or 7 away from, it's actually able to have a direct line of communication, direct line of sight. So it almost feels like it's there. And if you look at where a planet gets exalted, it gets debilitated in that 7th house away from it. So perhaps it's this idea that the planet wants to be in the exaltation house, but what it's actually doing is it's able to pull from both. It's able to pull from the house that it gains the most directional strength from, for example. So Saturn gets Digbala, directional strength, from the 7th house. And Libra is the natural 7th house. So let's just take, for example, Aries. If Saturn gets debilitated in Aries, but this is your 7th house if you're a Libra ascendant, this is going to make someone very capable of creating long-lasting relationships, because that's what Saturn wants to do. It wants to create things of longevity, things that are built to last, that function, that have high functionality. So this is going to give somebody a great diplomacy who's going to have patience, because Saturn rewards patience over time. Let's see. Oh, yes, of course. Sorry, digression. The houses that Saturn rules are the 10th house, which is the house of fame, house of career, and house karma. And the 11th house, which is the fun house of honors, awards, achievements, network circles, gains, financial gains coming in. And Saturn gets exalted in the 7th house, which is relationships. So who doesn't like all of these things? We should love Saturn. Now, the reason why Saturn's considered debilitated in Aries is you can look at these other houses and you can see Saturn likes other people. It likes network circles, which is Aquarius that it rules. It likes Capricorn, which is doing the getting the karma and the fame from what you do in this existence. And it gets exalted in Libra, the 7th house of relationships. So in Aries, that's the house of the individual. That's the house of Mars. And Saturn comes here and has to express itself through the individual without the benefit, perhaps, of other people. Now, this is going to help Saturn in the long run because Saturn is a planet that rewards efforts. It rewards patience and endurance. So these can be seen from the third house, which is another thing that Saturn does, is it throws a special aspect onto every house that is 3 from it. So in other words, every planet will give an aspect, direct aspect, on the 7th house away from it. But Saturn, Mars, and Jupiter, the slower moving planets, have special aspects that they will throw given any particular house that they're sitting in. So yet another little esoteric thing you might want to consult an astrologer to find out. I'm actually kind of working off of a script, so I don't know if my delivery is different, but yeah, I'm just going to read this because I don't even want to... Okay. In other words, the rules of astrology are based on functionality and predictability of planets and their various arrays and alignments, but debilitations and also retrogrades generate asymmetrical, nonlinear, irregular patterns. That's my thesis, so I'll just roll from here. Usually I'm just coming out with 12th house ideas from the subconscious, but because this is Mercury in retrograde, I wanted to have a script to go off of. So anyway, 4th wall broken. Yeah, so let's, I mean, I'm not dressing anything up to say that the debilitation is like some sort of, you know, it is actually a great thing, but it's going to require some hardship, some initiation on one's part, and just to roll through a few planets and how they might function in their various forms. I just talked about Saturn. You know, Saturn having to initiate its own actions in Aries. It's going to bring about a different quality to this planet in this person's personality overall. So let's talk about Venus, because Venus is actually going to get debilitated in a few days in Virgo. And this is the other curious thing about certain debilitations. Venus gets debilitated in Virgo, which is the house its friend Mercury gets exalted in. And Mercury gets debilitated in the opposite house, obviously, in Pisces, where Venus, its friend, gets exalted. So this is just kind of... It's like if I'm in my friend's house, why do I feel weakness? I don't know. Anyhow, so the other thing is with a lot of the debilitations, and Mercury and Venus are a great example because they travel so closely together. This will create a Nichabang Raj Yoga. So this is where astrology kind of talks about how these debilitations gain their secret superpower. Actually, there's usually some kind of other planet that's giving strength or secret strength to that debilitated planet. So Venus having to go in Virgo. Venus in Virgo is not going to bring out an ugly person. They're going to be very attractive usually, and probably slightly insecure about that level of attractiveness. So Venus gets exalted in Pisces, and I've seen more often than not, this is one of the most confusing placements, because Venus in our realm is material elements, resources, food, luxury items. But where Venus gets its superpower, its exaltation, is in the house of Moksha, in the 12th house of Pisces, where we all go to experience isolation from this realm, in whatever way that is, whether it's sleeping or other bed pleasures, or being in spiritual isolation at a convent or an ashram or a temple. So Venus in Pisces is going to give beauty, luxury, all those things, but it's going to give a lack of satisfaction with those things. Whereas I think Venus in Virgo might get more satisfaction out of those material things, because Virgo is the house of our day-to-day activities. It's the 6th house. So here Venus is going to be working hard, finding ways around having to feel a lack of beauty, and thereby become more beautiful in some way. So now let's talk about Mercury. Where Mercury is debilitated. It's the first time I've done that clause, so I'm trying to break myself of that. Mercury is debilitated in Pisces, the 12th house, because Mercury gets exalted and multricone in Virgo, which is the house of the matrix. Mercury likes doing deals, information, business transactions, dealing with data, dealing with day-to-day activity. Going to the 12th house, Mercury has to consider the spiritual realm. It has to consider everything outside of the matrix, the Akashic records. So Mercury can do very well in Pisces. What I'm kind of showing here is that the nature of the exaltation and debilitation points are the mutual aspect, are the relationship. So this is perhaps the reason why astrology considers Nietzsche to be a debilitation. And I just reminded myself, Nietzsche tends to mean just low. So the idea of an exaltation being high, ucha, I don't know if that's what ucha means, apologies, but the idea that it's high and Nietzsche is low. It's the high frequency of the exaltation, the low frequency of the debilitation. They're expressing that planet's energies in dynamically different ways, but very much interdependent upon each other because of that 7th aspect. So anytime you're looking at, this is segueing into a relationship compatibility hot take, anytime you're going to look at relationship compatibility, one of the first things you look at is where the Venus is, but also 7 away from Venus. That's going to be a place that that individual will have a compatibility match. Of course, 7 away from the moon is definitely going to be that as well. So when you're talking about mutual aspects, you're automatically talking about relationship compatibility, business partnership compatibility. And for this reason, the concepts of, I'll do one last, Mars and Jupiter. So Jupiter gets debilitated in Jupiter gets debilitated in Capricorn, Mars gets debilitated in Cancer, which are their respective exaltation points. And these are actually friendly planets. So let's say that Jupiter, and this can actually happen, they're looking at each other. This is creating a remarkable dynamism between these two houses, because they're able to harness the natural symbiotic, brain drift, they're able to harness the natural symbiotic qualities of the mutual aspect and be in the debilitation points, which is to say the frequency that not everybody sees. So this gives you an advantage, actually. That's where I've sort of been going with all of this. If you understand the exaltations and debilitations, you understand someone who, with an exaltation, might have less adversity on the surface. But when that adversity comes, inevitably, because every chart is going to give some adversity, they might be less equipped to handle that particular planet's response to the adversity. So, depending on how important that planet is in their chart, all these factors go into, including, let's go down the main things, because let's just say you have all the planets exalted. How these are actually going to be activated is going to depend on 3 major factors I can think of right off the top of my head. So that's Mahadasha schedule, which is the either the Vimshatari or the Chaturasha scheme, that schedule will reveal what planets and what houses will come alive at what time. The sort of other major factor dependent on the dasha is the transit, the actual planets transiting in the houses in the chart. Will they actually activate when the dasha schedule says it's optimal for them to activate? And then another factor that can bring kind of mind-melting accuracy is Ashtaka Varga scores, which give an exact indication of when a planet comes alive in a certain house. So those major factors, as well as I mentioned Digbala before, directional strength. Saturn, I gave us the example, is perfect because Saturn gets the most directional strength from being in the 7th house. Even if it's in Aries, if that is, as a Libra, your 7th house, I think that's a very strong, I don't want to use these terms anymore, but that's a really strong Saturn no matter what. The Sun gains directional strength in the 10th house. The Moon gains directional strength in the 4th house. So these are the opposite of the luminaries. Okay, I think I managed to get through most of that, and hopefully the sound is semi-okay. I'm just going to kind of touch on a few points of interest more than anything. As we get into the fall season, it's noteworthy because if you're born during like October or November, there's a good chance you have at least one planet debilitated or exalted. And the reason being, this is a hot spot for the 3 planets that travel together most often. So Mercury, Sun, and Venus, each one of them gets some kind of activation in Virgo and Libra. So Mercury gets exalted in Virgo, Venus gets debilitated in Virgo. Venus rules, is the lord of Libra, where the Sun is debilitated. So if a debilitation is such a bad thing, then that creates a problem for a lot of people. So I just don't think it's that bad of a thing. And yes, as many other factors that go into how well a planet will express itself, including the aspects, lots of other esoteric things, including the Gemini system, which I mentioned. Gemini earlier said Nietzsche, Ucha, same thing. Gemini is the brilliant mind behind the Gemini system, which has its own lognas and yogas, and can give even more precise insight as to when certain planets might come alive in certain charts. This was interesting. So the Mars and the Moon are the only planets which don't have a sign absent of debilitation. In other words, every planet has at least one sign where no other planet gets debilitated, except Mars and the Moon. So Mars rules Aries, where Saturn gets debilitated. Mars rules Scorpio, where the Moon gets debilitated. The Moon rules Cancer, where Mars gets debilitated. So you can see that there is a relationship here between the Moon and the Mars. The Moon and the Mars. Okay. But yeah, there's, I think, a lot of incredible research still to be done on these arcane, esoteric, beautiful concepts. KRS always talks about how Jupiter is, according to Vanamira, which is another yet another thing for me to pile into this. Jupiter actually does incredibly well in Leo, but actually even is more exalted in Aquarius. And there's enemy signs, which is something I had to delve into. Planets may do a lot worse in an enemy sign than in a debilitation sign, for instance. What else? Okay, I'm going to end with this kind of beautiful epiphany I had that I just wanted to squeeze in, and I'll probably reference in the future. What a retrograde planet is can be kind of better understood if you understand Rahu and Ketu, the north and south nodes of the moon. Rahu and Ketu are invisible to the naked eye, but we can actually pick them up on special like spectrometers and instruments that can detect subtle radiation in our universe. So they are energetic expressions of perhaps a parallel dimension, or a pet theory I've always had is there was a cataclysm of some kind that left the asteroid belt in our solar system. What if Rahu and Ketu are somehow the residual energies of that cataclysm? Anyhow, these nodes are always in a retrograde fashion. So while the sun and the moon will always be in a clockwise movement, Rahu and Ketu will always be in a counterclockwise movement. And I thought, isn't that interesting for retrograde planets? It's almost like a retrograde planet becomes synchronized with Rahu and Ketu, our sort of alternative lives, our alternate lives, and the karmas that we have already expressed through Ketu and have yet to express through Rahu. The retrograde planets are untying these karmic knots by synchronizing their orbit with Rahu and Ketu. Just a thought. On that, I'm going to say blessings, namaste, and I'll be at y'all with more drops once Mercury is out of retrograde.